So today I'm going to talk about the ways in which Section 2 being gutted, hollowed out, no longer any real federal enforcement of the Voting Rights Act is just it's a consequence of not dealing with the beliefs of the Confederacy, right? And how America is literally haunted by the specter of the Confederacy. And it has possessed us and it poisons everything that we do. And I legitimately think that all of our problems can go back to the fact that there was no punishment after that, right? And so these beliefs that are antithetical to just the idea of what America's supposed to be were allowed to proliferate. They were allowed to become mainstream. And it affects the ways in which everything thinks about maybe the idea of a democracy, right? The ways in which people regard their right to vote, the ways in which the media regards the right to vote, the ways in which the political parties think about the right to vote. And so, it's been a really, frustrating series of events because Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act was not I would say, surprise, right? Ever since the case Landry versus Calais, Louisiana versus Calais came around, that spelled the end, right? We knew that this was coming. It doesn't make it even any less painful to realize that this is a slippery slope that we constantly keep going because these, I'll say, conservatives legitimately want to go back to the ways in which the South existed during, we'll say, after the Cotton Gin, after 1793 and into maybe 1830. Like, they're obsessed with this time period, and it bleeds into what they are actually fascinated with, in my estimation. So Landry versus Calais, essentially, they were vote packing. So they basically packed all of the black people, as many black people as they could, they packed them into one district. Even though black people are 1/3 of the population in Louisiana, they would only be able to affect 1/6, right, of representatives, right, federally. That's not only including the other state, local, county situations when it comes to elected representatives like school committee mayors, right, sheriffs, all of these treasurers, all of these different secretary of state, all of these positions that affect people's lives, sometimes even more intimately than like a federal representative, right? But the fact is that the district was packed, and so they had to provide a remedy according to Section 2, in which you're 1/3 of the population. You cannot try and pack a district to dilute the people's vote. So they had to create a second majority minority district. Now, the ways in which they drew this district, with assistance of computers, of course, was to protect white representatives' congressional seats, like MAGA Mike Johnson, who, if you look into the weird relationship he had with his Haitian son, right, his adopted Haitian son, the man's a certified weirdo. Steve Scalise, who I think he got shot by some crazy person, right? And then some other woman, right? I don't remember her name. But the fact is that this district was challenged, that it violated the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, right? White people were claiming that because it was formed, I think, just along racial lines, that it violated their 14th Amendment rights. And it's the most cynical reading of the Reconstruction Amendments that were literally created to protect black people from violence and to allow them protection to participate in American life. It was used cynically to actually initiate the downfall of protecting black people's voting rights. We'll say like 100+ years later, right? And it just brings to mind just how obnoxious race neutral policies are. And also the people who say that identity politics is never a way to consider politics in America. And you see this from people who naively don't understand that your identity is everywhere, right? You cannot remove yourself from your identity. It just builds into how you believe certain things. And there are all these highbrow ideas that as soon as we get rid of identity, like everything will be great, America will be wonderful. But all we see is that people use these race neutral policies to make sure that they could potentially limit black people being able to participate in American society, right? And also to remove the protections that were created necessarily and on purpose because those rights were being violated. And they're just finding ways to violate these rights today without saying a slur. That's the part that gets me even angrier. Because when we look at this case, right, the Supreme Court says that the second majority minority district that Louisiana created for black people in Louisiana was illegal, right? And essentially that's going to remove a federal representative from Louisiana who is associated with the black community. Right. And so like people talk about like, how does representation matter? Equal representation. It means you should be able to actually effectively try and influence who's representing your community. And now the people, right, are most likely going to be represented by someone who does not care about their issues. And they're going to prioritize and allocate resources towards people, right, and then neglect everyone else. Right. It's a tale as old as America, right, where black people get ignored until white people have the same issues. And then as soon as white people provide a remedy, they then ignore black people again, even though the precursors to all the problems that we have are usually found in the black community first. Now, as it goes on, right, the Supreme Court literally had some of the ways in which they talked about what the solutions could be or what the problems they had with the Louisiana versus Calais case was crazy to me, right? You can't identify history, right? You're not allowed to use history. You're not allowed to use pattern recognition to acknowledge why certain things may be messed up, why it looks like this may be a racial gerrymander, right? You're not allowed to use history anymore. History's not enough. Even though when you consider the law itself, the law is basically constantly shaped by the history of it, right? We exist on precedent, right? I don't know the specific term, right? But all American law is based off of previous American law. And if you go back far enough, you'll find the Magna Carta, right? But everything builds, sorry, wrong direction. Everything builds up, right? And while the Supreme Court is highbrowed and says, you know, we're above it all, right? They are saying that no one is allowed to use history to build their arguments when that is all the Supreme Court does. And it just shows like how these beliefs that you should be allowed to essentially remove people's agency in this world is destroying American democracy. Wow, that was a bug. Because the first thing that these people are going to do immediately is to racially gerrymander as many sorry, my bad. Their first thing that they're going to try and do is racially gerrymander as many locations as they can, in the South especially. And they estimated that at least 12 representative seats held by Democrats, usually by black Democrats, is going to be lost to the Republican Party. So 12 representatives, right, out of the total of, well, we can say 535 is a big number for the black community to lose. I think like when it comes to the Congressional Black Caucus, I think there's around like 65, maybe 71. So it's not a negligible amount. And that loss of numbers is a loss of political power, a loss of political influence. And we've seen from the ways in which individuals like Summer Lee, Terry Sewell, Benny Thompson, right? When you have black Democrats that are like on their stuff, right? They're not like David Scott, right? When you have them that they're healthy and they're on it, they're actually able to hold power to account by asking them the questions they can't, that they feel uncomfortable answering, right? That's why when RFK went in front of the Ways and Means Committee, Terry Sewell asked him, like, how can you decide that people can't use the word black to examine why black mothers suffer higher pregnancy, I'd say childbirth mortality rates than white people. How can we even acknowledge that or provide a solution if you can't even use the word black in your research documents? That's how he sounded like when he was making that comment. And it's frankly disgusting. Like, they want to erase black people from being able to live in this country. Like, they do not want your identity, but they want to shout around and talk about the Roman Empire. They want to talk about the Vikings. They want to talk about all these other people's identity and how that factors into who they are. But no one else is allowed to have an identity that influences the way they look at the world, right? No one else is allowed to look at history in the ways in which it influences the way they think about the world. And these people are inherently selfish. They're inherently infantile, the way that I think about them. Because we have to remember, like, they came into this government, the Trump administration, on the idea that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, was bad for America. So they fired 300,000 black women. You're not allowed to use the word black, right? They're cutting education funding. They're cutting food stamps, WIC. They're trying to discourage people from research and science and all of these other things that actually improve things in our world, right? They just want to discourage every single thing that improves people's lives, right? Say, you can't do this because this is how we want you to be, right? It's literally taking away people's ability to be free in this world because they want everyone to exist in this like white theocratic idea where it's not even like white evangelicalism anymore. It's white Christian nationalism, in which I'm light on the word Christian because literally there's nothing Christ-like about the ways in which they operate. But I'm getting distracted. I need to go back, right? So you can't use history or pattern recognition to actually identify what may seem like a racial gerrymander, right? They also said in this particular instance that as long as you use the word partisan and it happens to affect Democrats, right, it doesn't matter. But my problem is, if you can't look at history, you won't acknowledge why a lot of black people are Democrats in the present day. And this is the other part that gets me so irritated. Not only the part where it's Clarence Thomas, who's... I've never met a man who's so happy to destroy other people's right to live freely on this planet so he can drive a goddamn RV, right? And then he's just going to die and just make life worse for everyone. And then he's just going to die after driving 200,000 miles on his RV, right? But my fact is, they say like, hey, if we happen to partisanly gerrymander and it affects black people, that's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with that because it's just a partisan gerrymander. And it's like, any Republican worth their salt is going to know that if you need to target certain racial groups because there's a reason why these groups do not vote for the other side. Like, consider the fact that when it comes to the Democratic Party, whether you want to acknowledge or not, through Lyndon B. Johnson, literally voted to protect black people's civil rights and voting rights in this country. And then we have the Great Society programs, right? And that was probably the first time in which you did have rights being protected by a political party, because before then, it was kind of like a toss-up, right? Because the Democrats used to be the party of the South. They used to be the party of the plantations. They used to be the party of the slave owners. But then there was a gradual shift. And then everyone kind of started to change who they were representing. Republican Party gets more prominence in the South, and they start to push more of these policies that black people are inadequate. They don't believe that black people are truly American. All these different ideas. And so black people start to gravitate towards the Democratic Party. Because obviously, like, one party considers them human enough to care about their issues to even, like, start to try and solve their issues. But then, like, we're sitting here and they're like, hey, well, if you happen to disenfranchise Democrats, that's okay. None of it's okay. Like, this is a race to the bottom, and it doesn't make sense. Like, do you want a better country or not? And it seems as though these people do not. And as I sit here and I just continue to think about it, right? They're like, oh, well, if you gerrymander Democrats, it's okay, right? They're doing this in the South, right? There's a reason why you do not have a mass amount of black Republicans in the South, because the Republicans literally fly the Confederate flag. They're literally and the Confederate flag is flown by the KKK. That was how they were represented. So why would the Supreme Court say, hey, it doesn't matter where you gerrymander as long as it's just done on partisan lines? But then you can't acknowledge history. So then you lose the ability to acknowledge why a lot of black people are Democratic or follow the Democratic Party in the South, especially. And it's just this cynical way, ha 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 ha. We're not racist because we're using the law and we're using the words, and it's all fake, right? And I really want to know what the end game is. Why, like, you want to promote power, right? And like right now, I would say the Republican Party has, I think, the most power that they're ever going to have, right? Have they made anything better for anyone? No. We've had 1 million people laid off this year. The EPA, instead of I would say valuing people's lives at around, I think it was like $11 million per person, so that like when corporations pollute and give people cancer or do certain things that make people sick, that there's an actual number that you can calculate as to what the damages are that you need to provide to provide a remedy. That's now zero. All they consider now the pollution. Like, what does it cost for the company to stop polluting? We're promoting coal, right, over renewable energy sources. And if there is a wind farm project or there's a solar project, the Trump administration, because they realize you can't just unilaterally cancel these projects that have had leases paid for, is now double dipping, where they are now using tax dollars to pay these companies to not build wind farms. And at the same time, right, electrical use has gone up, which means the price has gone up. And the United States exports so much energy that we are competing with the rest of the world for natural gas and petroleum. Now, you know, there's nothing wrong with exporting petroleum, but why wouldn't you want to diversify your resources? Oil is a finite resource. Natural gas is a finite resource. And my other problem is that when it comes to like investing in solar and wind, maybe I wouldn't have a problem with these leases being canceled if the money that they allocated went towards making the other energy sources cheaper. Like, I live in Boston, so one of the problems with our energy sources is the fact that we don't have the pipeline capacity to get as much natural gas from, I think, Pennsylvania and some of the Appalachian Mountains, right, to our plants, right? We don't have the capacity to basically make it cheaper for people. We have a bottleneck. We're constrained on what we can actually get into the state. Donald Trump paid Total Energies, a French company, I think $1 billion to not build these wind farms. And did he help anything with natural gas constraints in like New York and North Carolina where these projects were canceled? No. Instead, he told them to build a natural gas export terminal in Louisiana or Texas, literally paying this company to export natural gas out of the country, which doesn't cheapen the energy that Americans have to consume in this country. It just literally will make it more expensive because more and more is going to go down to these export terminals, especially considering the fact that the Appalachian shale is cheaper to export than I think some of the other sources. So which means that the East Coast of the United States is going to have increased energy costs, but then there's no investment in the pipeline capacity. So it's all just going to be going south. There's no increased consideration of how do we make it cheaper for the people. And it's these ideas that don't make any sense to me. But I've also gotten so far out of the plot because I started with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, right? Talking about how you can't acknowledge history and how these people are not making things better. But when it goes into it, it's projected that we're going to lose like 12 representative seats in the House, at least, right? That's black representation, as I said before. But then it's also local, city, and state, county as well, where we may see a 50% reduction in black representation for people in the communities that care about them, right? And I'll give you an example from Louisiana. In Louisiana, one of the state senators, right, wants to remove funding from the district court, I believe it is, in Louisiana, in New Orleans District Court. He wants to defund the district court, and he wants to reallocate those sources from New Orleans to wherever the hell he's from. But the fact is that New Orleans deals with the most cases of any parish within that state. And so he's going to remove the funding from the place of most need to a place that does not need it. They deal with 4 times the amount of cases, right? They have a need. They need staff. They need resources. They need information, research. And he's like, nope, I'm going to just take the money and give it to the Lily White district over here so that, we can build like marble courtrooms. While, there's not enough money to pay like a public defender to give appropriate defense for someone. And that decision, I can already assume, is going to happen in more frequency in the southern states if this decision is not if it is not fought back against, I would say effectively. You're going to see that, where you're going to see black people's quality of life erode because the people who make the decisions will no longer be from the community. And they're going to just allocate resources to the places that they care about more instead of the places that actually need it. Again, and then they're going to make life worse for black people. And then guess what? Crime, quality of life, education, right? Happiness, all of these things are going to decline. It's going to cause a problem, a crime spike. And then these locations that have black representation still would be considered incompetent. And then they're going to lose their seats, right? Even though they can't do as much as they're trying to because of the loss of resources and because of the loss of support from allies that they would have if this stupid decision wasn't passed. And then as it goes on, right, people are going to vote to take even more funding. And then the federal government might be like, hey, we're going to put you in receivership. And then it turns out no one gets any representation that matters because they just want to return us to not even the Jim Crow South. They want to return us to the 1800s South, right? Where you have to just sit around and be okay with whatever decision that white people come up with. And it frustrates me to no end because it's so evil. It doesn't make any sense at all that you want to encourage life to be actively worse for the people that you share locations with. And so, like, I don't know, like, the full effects of it, right? We'll see, right? We know that Tennessee is going to try to aggressively redistrict, right? Because they don't like, I think, 2 of the representatives there. Texas has already done it. Florida passed something today because it's the 29th. Let's see. Mississippi's already called a special session. And they're going to try to remove black representation, right? But, representatives like Terry Sewell lets you know why it's important, because there are questions that people don't think are important because they don't suffer from them. And then also considering problems that white people have, one of the reasons why Kristi Noem is out of a job is because Benny Thompson effectively cut her to shreds based off reporting that people had. So a black man capable at his job was in a position enough that he cut down a former representative, former governor, who basically reveled in committing violence against American citizens and just people in general. Like, and all I see is a doom loop that people are not prepared to talk about. But then I want to add that the media, the stupid media, is going to sit back and be like, oh my God, why is this happening? And they're not going to look at these real effects, because these conservatives want to literally destroy this country and then run on the destruction. But at some point, the destruction will not stay localized. It always spreads, right? Like every problem America has, right? We're talking drugs, we're talking lack of education funding, we're talking lack of upward mobility, we're talking lack of home ownership, job prospects. Who's suffering from that now, so much so that it's considered a national issue? White people, white men, right? And instead of realizing that you can find the solution together, they're going to try to exclude people. And then that's going to just provide an avenue for these people to slowly chip away at, I would say, the advantages or the solutions that they try to present to people. It's just so annoying. And it all comes down to the fact that voting has always been the most important thing ever. Right? And I hate the idea that people always share that voting doesn't matter. I think that you're an absolute fool if you say that. You're stupid if you say that. Because the point is that throughout America's history, the question has always been, who is an American, right? Because Americans get the right to vote, right? And who has their right to vote protected? That's always been the case. There's never been a single time in the history of America where that has not been an argument at some point in time, and people lost the plot, and they convinced certain white people that, hey, you have the right to vote. You know, we'll put in a grandfather clause, but then, you know, secretly we'll put in a literacy test so that, you know, it's fair, but you don't know how to read, so you can't vote. And it's interesting to consider some of the history, right? So something I've been going over is the Wilmington Massacre of 1898, right? When it comes to the fusion government that was created in order to take away some of the influence that wealthy white plantation owners, traders, I need to say that, traders who should have been, you know, had, you know, in North Carolina. They tried to take over the government to effectively push for the problems that they shared together, right? You had white populists, poor white farmers, and I think black Republicans, and they fused together, you know, like, what is it, Vegeta Trunks or whatever, I don't know, Dragon Ball Z something. And wealthy white planters and rich people, elites, did not like that because they realized, you know, your power of the vote is stronger together. And you can actually affect change that is not beneficial to them. And so they use the oldest trick in the book, white supremacy, and say that black men are going to assault white women, right? Those are the two tried and true things that have always worked in American history. And then they push that to justify violence, to justify people not having their rights protected, right? The president of the United States at the time didn't even think it was something that he could get himself involved in because of the optics of it. And then those black people that actually pushed to make things better with people that they didn't trust. This is the other thing people don't realize. They did not trust these white people that they had formed a collaboration or a coalition with. They did it because it was necessary. And then that fell apart immediately because people had never been strong enough to realize and see past the initial superficial ideas that people share. And like, here we go again, right? You can go back even further, right? But we'll stay at 1898, right? 1898, that was all about trying to make sure that black people would not collaborate with other white people in this country about their votes and about what they wanted to advocate for. And what is the hollowing out of the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act going to do? It's going to make sure that black people do not have the ability to fully vote to affect the community around them, and they will not be able to collaborate with anyone else because their votes will not matter. Right? That's what they're trying to do. And we sit around and we're like, oh my God, the votes don't matter. It always matters. And I think I'm riffing at this point, but it also gets me. The one issue voters, right? The ones who only care about every foreign policy issue. They talk about Israel-Palestine like it's the only thing that ever happens. You cannot solve the Israel-Palestine problem without dealing with the specter of the Confederacy that is looming large over the South. Because when you want to get into the crazies, the people that support the ways in which Israel operates, right? That comes from a lot of evangelical Southern Christians. But when you try to tell people this, they're like, you don't care about a genocide? Yes, I care about it. But there are certain steps that you have to follow to make sure that you don't just swing the pendulum for it to be swung back. Right? Say we get a president that ends it one day, right? Unless we deal with the considerations of certain citizens, that's never going to stop, never going to change. We don't even enforce the rules that we have now. And we think that we have one president who's going to change everything about Israel Palestine, a conflict that's older than all of us at this point, other than Chuck Grassley. And so it's just like, this is annoying because people said like this was the thing that killed the election for Kamala Harris. And I'm like, okay, this killed the election for Kamala Harris for you, but you couldn't even take a moment to see what was looming around the horizon. And people have been doing this, right, since the 80s. Right? I'll just say 80s. It's probably longer. But we've been doing this, where people on the political spectrums are never really thinking long term, other than the crazy right wingers who develop multi-generational plans to destroy things, like the Federalist Society that chooses all the federal judges during Republican administrations. That was started in the 80s by random ass law students that just stuck with it. But I would say people on the other side, I would say people left of the I'll say Confederates, conservatives, right? There's always a new issue to argue about instead of realizing, like, hey, these racist people on the other side are going to destroy black and brown people first, and then they're going to focus that on the rest of you. And so, like, Section 2 is like the beginning of a lot of issues. And I would say that I've been like kind of like motivated in staying like, I would say sane and calm, but it's really truly, I think, planting a seed in my brain that you have to be almost villainous to these people. There's no kumbaya. I'm talking about the fact that like Donald Trump had his third assassination attempt, quote unquote, right? No one believes him because of the Butler stuff and how his ear still looks good. He had his third assassination attempt, and Dana Bash was on a CNN telling Jamie Raskin, do you want to calm down the rhetoric? What do you mean calm down the rhetoric? Donald Trump threatened to nuke Iran. Donald Trump called Nigeria, Haiti, all these black countries, shithole countries. He likes violence and getting people beat up. During his first term, I think it was General Mattis or Mark Esper, someone. He was wondering why you couldn't shoot Black Lives Matter protesters in the leg. He wanted to physically shoot the citizens that he was there to represent. And it's just like, oh, we need to calm down the rhetoric. And like that's why I'm starting to consider CNN controlled opposition. Especially because they are owned now at this point, right? Just like everything is owned by crazy people. Like, consider the fact that Google owns YouTube. Sergey Brin is another right-wing chud. Another, like, weird loser who's sitting around trying to make things actively worse, right? He moved out of California because of the billionaire's tax. He had to pay 5%. Oh, my God, I get it, right? It's annoying, right? California's a beautiful state. Someone keeps trying to get me to move there. I don't want to move there. But instead of, like, dealing with the tax or just moving on, he moved to the other side of Lake Tahoe into Nevada, and then he's now spending tens of millions of dollars to shut down the billionaire's tax proposal. It's like, if you're going to move and invest in that state. Don't move and then actively try to destroy politics because we haven't really figured out the fact that rich people have money and nothing really, I would say, productive to focus in on are annoying as hell. He does not have a hobby. If this is what he does, I know he doesn't have a hobby. What, woodworking, make a knife, I don't know, build a library. Like, stop voting to make sure that you can keep all your ill-gotten gains for as long as possible. You're not a pharaoh. You will never be buried with the money. They're not going to perfect, cryogenics or whatever the heck it is, right? They're not going to be able to chop off your head and you be able to still use your money. There's no clones yet, right? When we die, we are dead, right? And so I don't get it. There is at no point in time in which right now you having hundreds of billions of dollars is going to matter in like 30 years. It's not going to matter for him, right? But what is going to matter is the world that his kids live in. And these people are pushing for is a world in which they are enemy number one. Like, no matter what you do, people will see your family as the enemy because you push and push and push, you take and take and take, and now there's nothing else for everyone. Now again, I am so far off the point that I'm just talking about things that bother me. But point is, so if I go back to section 2, I talked about how it's going to start a doom spiral in kind of the black community, in which the media will happily pick up the stories in which they are able to highlight the ways in which the black community will not be able to deal with the problems that are going to come from the misallocation of the resources that are happening because the representatives that were there to allocate the resources appropriately are no longer there to actually do that action, or there to prevent the misallocation. And it's just so annoying, because what else do they want from people in general? Like, how far and how many rights do you take away, and how long do you do it? And we think that because a man is genteel and he doesn't use a slur, that he's not doing ultimate evil. People like John Roberts, people like Clarence Thomas, these people who have been actively a part of this project for decades. What is it? Neil Gorsuch, when he's not talking about Native Americans. Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, right? Samuel Alito, all of these ghouls who are sitting around claiming that they have this solid and fair and moral interpretation of the law, are literally showcasing how fake the law is. And everything that they're doing right now is eroding the trust that people have in this government. And that's a part of it, right? They want to make sure that people are disenchanted with voting. They want to disenfranchise and disenchant, because they think that if they run everything and no one is a bulwark against their worst successes, that everything will be good. And I just have to say, the Civil War is an example of, I think, the default position of a lot of white people, right? When white people have an enemy, they're good. But the fact is that you've seen it, that when white people have no one else to look towards, they will get busy killing themselves, right? Even the Civil War, right? There was not a single black person that caused the Civil War. It was white people not being able to deal with their inherent issues with each other. And they fell back into this barbaric mind state that reflects the ways in which they think about the world. And the Trump administration is the culmination of that action. They want to go back to this world in which, white people didn't have to think hard about their identity. You mean you don't have to grow up? Like, these people are infants. They don't want to mature. They don't want to think about how the world has changed, right? I was thinking about a speech from the junior senator of Missouri, Eric Schmidt. He made a speech about the ways in which we need to think about, like, who is an American. Like, that's the basis of it. And he talks about how the pilgrims came here to share their divine knowledge, and they spread it throughout the throughout the country, and then that spreads into the ways in which America flourished because of these beliefs. And at no point in this speech that he shared, that was basically just white replacement theory without saying it, right? Saying that, like, he wants white kids to inherit a white America. At no point did he highlight the fact that Native Americans, black people, and Mexicans, right, were interacting with white people. Now, I collapse white people and all their little ethnicities into one group. That those 4 groups there were the ones that actually determined where America would go, how it developed, what were its priorities, right? Everyone else came after, right? He doesn't acknowledge that at all. And, like, these people don't want to even consider history. And that's the scary part, because people fall for it. People sit back and they think, hey, this sounds okay. This doesn't sound that aggressive. And as long as you say it in a nice voice, they think that you're not saying some of the nastiest things you've ever heard in your life. But if history has ever shown us anything, right, is that these particular actions, these particular egregious ways in which the Supreme Court oversteps, I believe, in which the Supreme Court rules that presidential power is above everything, it doesn't end well. Not only mentally, right? I'm thinking of the Civil War. I don't think that America will head up to that point, especially because of the ways in which AI will be utilized to police people. But the ways in which people think in this country, in the little conflicts that they have, those are going to grow larger and larger and larger. And there are going to be multiple groups that are stuck in the middle. I want you to take a guess as to who. And it's just going to be white people battling each other because that is the natural state of them. There's like, it's all individualities, no real community. And I'm just learning to hate this. I don't know what to think. It's just kind of, this is just a kind of a stream of consciousness. The fact is that it's too soon to know exactly how it's going to affect the presidential election. It is most likely not going to fully affect the midterm election. But you never know, right? Florida's already said what it says. Mississippi's going to probably try something. But I'm worried about kind of the future because I do not think that people who consider themselves in the Democratic Party or left of center actually consider how you solve a lot of these problems that they want to deal with. I was listening to Pod Save America, Jon Favreau, talking to Ken Martin, the head of the DNC. And Jon Favreau said something that kind of triggered something in me, where he complained about the allocation of resources that Ken Martin was talking about. Ken Martin was talking about investing in Guam, right? He was talking about investing in all 50 states. And Jon Favreau said, why? And I took that from him to be like, he didn't want Ken Martin to invest in every place in which Democrats exist. And I consider that an abdication of your ideology if you believe that. And you're a ineffective dullard who is ill-equipped to actually spread, I would say, the Democratic Party throughout the country. Because he's like, why don't we just focus on the places in which Democrats exist? Right? Because he's like, oh, let's just focus on the Democratic states and the swing states. When he doesn't realize that the world is changing. Ken Martin, for all his flaws, is actually trying to present, I think, a better solution to the problems. It's not just, hey, let's just do it this way. But from what I took from that is the ways in which a lot of like white Democrats and white progressives talk about actually changing the Democratic Party. All they're focused on is who drives the leadership decisions. Who is the representative that represents the face? That's all they care about. They don't care about the actual base of the Democratic Party. They don't care about bolstering the numbers. All they care about is who gets to win to be the face of it. And the fact is like, that's just fighting to be in second place. Always. That's everything these people do. And I say this because another white dude, Keith Edwards, he talked about how when Sean Harris was running for Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat in Georgia, it would be a long shot, right? And he literally said, do not invest anything here. Do a swing state instead. And I said, you do realize that there are millions of black people in the South, right? And that when you invest in places, you actually build a relationship with that community, and you actually encourage more people to run if they see that they will get support. But because they didn't look like someone that Keith Edwards thought would push whatever things he believes in, or he's not quote unquote electable in the United States of America, he said, wait, don't waste your time. Basically saying, give up on the South, give up on black people. And that's what gets me going, because I'm scared that we have Section 2 gone. And instead of thinking, hey, now that they're going to gerrymander the hell out of everything, why don't we make sure that people understand what these people are trying to do? They're trying to take away your ability to vote. That in these particular districts, if you have a newly gerrymandered district, they're trying to make sure that they never have to be accountable to you. When beforehand, there were more options available. but they don't want that for you. But they're never good. I'm afraid that people like Keith Edwards, John Favreau, and all these other people that are advocating the progressive versus moderate Democrat fight over broadening the base, I'm afraid that won't be a consideration for them. They'll never try to make that argument, because this Section 2 and basically allowing gerrymandering to exist throughout the United States could be the Achilles heel to everything that the Republican Party is trying to stand for. But you have to invest there. And these people don't want to invest there because the people don't look like them, so they don't think they have the same issues. They don't care about them, right? And I'm scared that I would say the people that have the loudest voices on the so-called left, right, don't actually care about making sure that there's actual long-term strategy. Now, you get me. I don't think Ken Martin has done a perfect job, but no one has. But for what we see, like every progressive person, you can include David Hogg in this, they are more focused on fighting Democrats than they are to get more Democrats into the party. I don't know. But when it comes to like a strategy to deal with Section 2 being eroded, gutted, enforcement no longer available, the thing that has to happen is, first of all, you gotta pack the courts. It's over. That's the position you gotta have. Courts gotta get packed, right? If there is a Democratic president, they gotta pack the courts. We're doubling the size, tripling the size, and if there is a blue wave, we gotta impeach all of these randos. There needs to be a change in the ways in which you're actually allowed to remain in the Supreme Court. No more lifetime appointments for the Supreme Court. You can schedule it so that it changes every three technically terms. I would say 12 to 16 years is a fair amount of time. And then you gotta go, because this is stupid, right? The fact is that the other thing you gotta do is you also gotta focus on state races. The people that are gonna redraw these maps are state legislatures, which the Democratic Party is making overtures to actually support, which is what John Favreau actually complained about. There are things to complain about what Ken Martin said, but he said he was correct. You need to share resources with everyone. That includes state races in which Democrats have been winning. But consider John Favreau's of the world, he wouldn't do that, because he would consider it a waste of his money if it wasn't immediately perfect. If you're not able to convince everyone all at one time, like they think that if you don't win outright, you lose, but you chip away. That's how Republicans have gotten to this point. And I'm at the age where I'm thinking about political strategy, right? And I don't think these people actually think about it smartly, right? You have to flip these state legislatures. And that means you have to actually consider what the people at those areas want. That's why Sean Harris was a particularly important guy to support. Now, I'm not saying he would have won, but the dude was, I think he was a farmer, and he was a vet. I think he was a lieutenant colonel in the military. That's the kind of man that can convince people. Now, I don't know about Dan. I think Dan Osborne. Is it Dan Osborne, the man who's running for senator in Nebraska? He's gonna be a different flavor of Democrat, but there are people going to be like, oh, I don't like that one, right? And then this other idea, like they keep promoting people that have no expertise. Like we have Tom Steyer, who has not found a race he doesn't want to throw hundreds of millions of dollars away to try and get himself elected, instead of just starting off showing people that you are capable. He's like, let me jump to the senior leadership position because I'm rich. In the ways in which I've seen him run, he flip-flops. I don't trust him because his positions seem to change every time the wind shifts. You can't trust a guy like that. And instead of supporting the man who has actually had so many different positions, Javier Becerra, right? I don't know if I said his last name right. We have a British dude who helped negotiate Brexit, not negotiate, but encourage Brexit. And he's like, I want to do that for California. You mean you want to do that for California, the fourth largest economy in the world that gets supported by the little being associated with the United States of America? You want to negotiate a Brexit style removal of California from the way it operates? California sets the standards for the rest of the United States of America. And instead of like getting people that actually like have experience like negotiating stuff, being a part of the Congress, being a part of the federal government, like as a cabinet member, right? As a literal lawyer, attorney general, all these different things. They're like, nah, we want to give it to the billionaire because, he said he'll arrest, what's his name? Stephen Miller. How is Tom Steyer going to arrest Stephen Miller? He's not going to be able to do that. He's just, oh, I'll get rid of ICE. You're running to be governor. You cannot get rid of ICE. Oh, he'll do something on cooperation. That's not what he said. He said he would push to eliminate ICE. That's a federal job. The man should have run to be a representative if that's what he wanted to vote to do. And that's the thing. Like, I don't trust these people because none of it's like long-term thinking. It's all short-sighted things. But I'm kind of getting long-winded at this point, and I just find it really frustrating that we're sitting here. Section 2 is gutted. It's going to create a doom spiral of misallocation of funds and a lower quality of life for black people if the Democratic Party is not able to actually use this new egregious act to get the people to vote in mass against this and to get enough Democrats in the office that you remove Republicans for like a generation or two. Like, they just need to go. They do not exist for the betterment of this country. In fact, they try and make every single thing that they can worse. And I guess that's my main thing. Also, I just have to say this. I'm starting to hate Republicans. Right? This whole like we can work together and figure things out together. That's not working for me anymore. I'm starting to lose that ability, that belief. It's starting to change in me, and I'm realizing it. I'm starting to grow a little bit of hatred. And I don't want that. But Section 2 is gone, and it's starting a lot of stupid stuff. So that's it for now, though.